What could our new PM mean for landlords? Well, this week we had a new PM living at number 10. For landlords, the natural question is, should we be worried? And my honest answer is this: good landlords don't panic, but then you need to pay attention. Mr. B's record in Greater Manchester gives us some useful clues about his approach to housing, landlords and enforcement. And to be honest, the direction of travel is really already been established. The Renters' Rights Act fundamentally changed the legal framework for landlords across England. It's happened already. Fixed term assured short hold tenancies have gone. Section 21 has gone. Rent increases must follow a more controlled process. And local authorities, this is the big one, local authorities have been given stronger enforcement responsibilities. So for me, the question may not be whether Mr. B takes the private rented sector in a completely different direction. I think the more relevant question is whether he takes us further and faster along the road that we're already travelling. So what does what happened in Greater Manchester tell us? Well, during his time as mayor, Mr. B took a very active approach to housing. And one of the clearest examples was the Greater Manchester Good Landlord Charter. The Charter was established as a voluntary and free scheme covering both private and social landlords. But it was designed to be far more than a logo that landlords could simply add to their website. Its standards covered areas including property condition, affordability, safety, repairs, communication, complaints, inspections, support for residents. Now, the central idea was that landlords should aim to provide more than the minimum legal standard. And in some respects, the new ombudsman that's going to be in place by October with the Renters' Rights Act will actually do this. So that road has already been laid. But I look at that phrase, more than the minimum legal standard, because as a landlord, when I hear that, I immediately get a little bit concerned, because I'd say, well, I've got a gas certificate, I've got an electoral report, I protect the deposit. What more am I supposed to do? But this is precisely where the private rental sector has already changed on the 1st of May. Having a certificate is no longer the same thing as demonstrating good management. The question is not simply whether a gas safety inspection took place, it's whether the certificate was valid. It's whether the resident received it correctly, whether any recommendations were acted upon, and whether the landlord can produce the full record if challenged. It's no longer enough to say that inspection was carried out. As a landlord, we will need to show when it happened, what was found, what action was recommended, if any, who was instructed, and when the work was completed. The minimum legal standard tells you what you must have. Professional management is about the process sitting behind it. Greater Manchester's approach has been broadly followed in 2 tracks. The first has been to recognise and support landlords who are prepared to provide safe, properly managed homes. And the second, which I think is great, was to take a stronger action against landlords whose properties or management fell below the required standard. And that distinction is important because Greater Manchester, they recognised they still needed private landlords. Residents needed homes, and responsible landlords continued to play an essential role in providing them. The tough message has been directed towards those landlords who cannot and don't meet their obligations, and they do exist. So what did Greater Manchester actually do to encourage good landlords? Well, there's evidence of practical incentives, although I'd be careful about describing them as proven commercial rewards. Landlords registering as supporters of the Good Law Charter were offered access to advice, training, workshops, professional networks, help in checking their compliance. The published support included access to an advisor, these action plans, policy templates, accredited training, And there were some financial incentives as well. And those supporters were able to apply for retrofit grants of up to £30,000 through the Warm Homes Local Grant Programme. There were also discounts on professional training and other partner services. So those were real things. They're practical benefits. And a landlord may receive help improving the property, clearly understanding what compliance, access to expertise that could reduce the chance of an expensive mistake. However, I've got to be honest, it's too early to show that anything has changed. The scheme really didn't start until June last year, and therefore most accurate conclusion is that Greater Manchester sought to recognise, support and incentivise good landlords rather than simply rewarding them financially for being good. However, landlords who ignored their responsibilities were likely to face much closer scrutiny. Enforcement officers were put in place. So a little bit about enforcement. Well, historically, some landlords I know have treated council enforcement as, to be honest, a remote possibility, but really that is no longer a safe assumption. We showed you that in our last webinar, and under the Renters' Rights Act, councils have stronger powers to investigate landlords and letting agents, obtain evidence and issue financial penalties. Depending on the breach, penalties can reach thousands or in some cases tens of thousands of pounds. But the fine, that may not be the only cost. There may be legal expenses, lost management time, rent repayment orders. Remember, that is now 24 months. Reputational damage, who wants to end up in the Hunts Post or Cambridge Evening News, and difficulties when possession of the property is required. The greatest danger is not one enormous mistake. It's a collection of smaller failures that together demonstrate that the property has not been properly managed. Property condition, well, obviously it is paramount. And the first area that we as landlords should re-examine is the physical condition of the property. We are moving away from a system which landlords wait for a resident to report a serious problem and then deal with it informally. The growing expectation is that as landlords, we will have to take a proactive approach, and that means inspecting the property regularly, identifying, developing problems and acting before they become serious hazards. Damp and mould are obvious examples, but landlords should also consider ventilation, heating, electrical safety, fire risks, loose handrails, damaged flooring, defective windows and structural issues. Just a few to be careful about. A small patch of mould should not simply be wiped away and forgotten. The cause needs to be considered. Questions to ask yourself: is there adequate ventilation? Is there a leak? Is the heating working properly? Has your resident been given appropriate advice about use of heating? Was the advice recorded? And was the property checked again? A good inspection process creates an early warning system. It protects your resident, but also protects you as the landlord and your investment. But isn't that AWAB's law that will be coming in 2030? Well, we might find that landing sooner. And I think that's a good thing, because it's going to be the bad landlords that feel the pinch, and rightly so. I've talked a lot about record keeping. Many landlords genuinely care about their residents and respond quickly when something goes wrong, but kindness and good intentions are not a compliance record. A landlord may remember telephoning a contractor immediately. A contractor may remember attending the property. The resident may have even been perfectly satisfied at the time. But 6 months later, if there is another issue, what evidence remains of what happened? Could you show when the issue was reported, when the contractor was instructed, what they found, what they repaired, and how it was concluded? Verbal conversations definitely need to be followed up by written confirmation. Messages need to be clear and retained. Inspection reports, photographs, invoices, certificates, and correspondence need to be stored in an organised way. The landlord who completes the work but cannot prove it may find themselves in a far weaker position later than they expect. little bit about rent reviews. Now, this requires a professional process. Mr. B has previously supported stronger intervention during periods of intense pressure on household finances, but that doesn't automatically mean that a national rent freeze or formal rent controls will be introduced. Until a policy is announced, please don't read clickbait headlines and put it down as fact. However, rent increases are already receiving greater scrutiny under the Renters' Rights Act. Landlords can increase the rent once a year, but you've got to use the correct Section 13 process and give the required notice. Your resident can challenge an increase if they believe it exceeds the open market rent. But this doesn't mean that as landlords we should avoid reviewing rents. In fact, ignoring the rent for several years can create so much a big problem for your resident. A better approach is to conduct a professional review each year. Look at genuine local comparable properties. Consider the condition, the size, location, and specification of the home. Take account of your resident's circumstances and make a reasoned decision. An evidence-based increase is far easier to explain and to defend than a figure selected simply because our costs have risen. Now, tax should also be watched, but not guessed at. So landlords, we've already faced mortgage interest restrictions, additional stamp duty, and rising regulatory costs. Mr. B has previously expressed interest in reforming aspects of property taxation. However, previous comments are not the same as confirmed government policy. Again, as landlords, we need to watch the announcements closely, but don't make major financial decisions based solely on the headlines or what the man down the pub says. A decision to sell, retain, refinance, purchase another property should be based on proper calculations. Things like what's the current net return, what capital gains tax could arise from a sale, what income needs to be replaced, and does the property require further investment? Could the rent be reviewed? Would refinancing improve our position as landlords? Property investment, I've said before, is a long-term decision. Political developments matter, but they should form part of the calculation rather than replacing it. So the question that every landlord should ask, and for landlords here in Cambridgeshire, the practical response is not wait for the new government announcement. It's to examine the property now and the management file, check the tenancy records, confirm the deposit was protected correctly and the required information was served at the right time. Review those gas safety certificates, the EICRs, the EPC, smoke alarms, carbon monoxide alarms, and right to rent records. Examine the rent review history, your inspection reports, repair reports, and communications with the resident. Then look beyond the paperwork. Are there early signs of damp or mould? Is the ventilation adequate? Have repairs been completed properly, or have they been repeatedly patched? Are recommendations from inspections being followed through? Can you see clearly how every reported issue reached a conclusion? And then ask yourself one final question. If the council asked you to inspect your complete property file tomorrow, would you be comfortable in handing it over? Not after spending 2 weeks rebuilding it. Not after searching through old mails, messages, and drawers full of paperwork. Could you confidently demonstrate that the property is safe, the tenancy is compliant, the rent has been handled correctly, and your resident concerns have been taken seriously? If the answer is not a clear yes, then honestly, that's the place to begin. And this is an opportunity for good landlords. Political change, obviously, understandably, creates uncertainty, but responsible landlords shouldn't view every increase in standards as a threat. The country as a whole still needs good quality rented homes, and residents still need landlords who maintain their properties, respond to problems, and communicate clearly. Professional landlords who understand their responsibilities will be in so much a stronger position than those who rely on habit, incomplete records, or the hope that no one will check. At Maxine Lester, our role is not simply to find a resident and collect the rent. We help the landlords we work with protect the property, the income and the tenancy by making sure the correct systems are in place. We do examine the detail, identify weaknesses and deal with issues before they develop into complaints, failed possession cases or financial penalties. Mr. B's record at Greater Manchester suggests that the distinction between responsible landlords and poorly managed properties will become even more important nationally. And the landlords who prepare now will be able to demonstrate that they provide safe, compliant and properly managed homes. Those who cannot produce the evidence may find the new environment a little bit difficult. So don't wait for the next major housing announcement before you do anything. Don't wait for a council inquiry. Review that property. Review your paperwork and make sure the management process would withstand proper scrutiny. Because modern property lettings is not simply about owning a house and receiving rent. It's about being able to demonstrate clearly and consistently the home is being managed properly. If you're a landlord in St Ives, Cambridge, Huntingdon, Ely or the surrounding areas, and you're uncertain whether your property would pass that test, why don't you give us a call at Maxine Lester? We really can help you understand your current position, identify anything requiring attention and put the right process in place before a manageable issue becomes an expensive one. Landlords who act now will be the ones best placed for whatever comes next. And if you find these updates useful, why don't you subscribe to Maxine Lester TV? We look forward to seeing you there.